tune in on close. Yeah, I gotta paste that stuff in. Yeah, and with these cases, they're so boring.
Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Like for the next one, we should probably try to take my laptop right into that switcher. Got it sitting by Justice. My phone, bro? Shady. Good, Michael? You still got me on audio? Check, 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 check. Check, check, check. You good? I think we're live. Right? We live? Hi, folks. Thanks for physically coming to this. We'll give people a minute or two to spool up online. I know some people are planning on watching on the internet, so we'll just let the live stream run for a minute or two, generally. And this is real meta because Ron's videotaping me being videotaped on the live stream, so it's a circle of life. I hope so. One kind of just silly thing, right? Like, if you're going to ask a question tonight, please step up to the mic. I know in the past we've just yelled at us up front, and that's fine for like group conversation. But the point of this is also to create like an archival record of everything we do. So if somebody is an equity holder and not able to physically be here, they can actually hear the interaction and all that kind of stuff. So Anthony's not here, so there won't likely be sort of witty banter back and forth. But if he was here, we would make him step up to the mic, kind of thing. Okay, we're just gonna go.
You need to leave Anthony alone.
Leaf Anthony. Let me take this piece of gaff tape off. It's driving me crazy.
Can we just all have pieces of paper that say funny and not funny for Ryan's jokes? We only need one of those options.
You need to use the mic, Buzzy. Nobody can hear you on the live stream.
Okay, so it's official. Retroactive 1/1/17. Some number of people have come over on the cap table, and I'm going to show you the list of everybody who has officially accepted their unit. So just to refresh everyone's memory, there was an old entity that still exists that was called Red Blue Voice LLC from 2011. And everything we've done since 2011 in one way or another has had financial or sweat equity component from that original LLC. So upon the advice of our astute legal team, which involved Eric Davis and K&L Gates and our regular lawyer, Greg Zigarelli, we had to bring over all of our old, we didn't have to bring them over. We had to offer everybody who was on our old cap table one unit of the co-op, since it was their investment of time, cash, and energy that allowed the co-op to be formed a half a decade later. And so not many of them accepted that unit, but you'll see on this cap table I'm going to show you in a second that some of them did, and you won't recognize their names, and some of them live in Chicago, and you'll never see them probably. It's Matt Blake. Hi, Matt, if you're watching. He might be actually watching. Then the other set of units that was offered were for people's past participation in 2016. So some of the people sitting in this room invested a lot of time, money, or energy into getting us where we are today as an official organized co-op with an operating agreement and rules and process and all that stuff. And so they were also offered a 2016 unit before the year 2017. Now, there's also a group of people in the room, Renee, Ashley, Alden, probably some other folks, maybe Brian, who will be offered, who will receive their first unit for the year 2017 at the end of December. And then everybody else in the room will have that same opportunity to accept their 2017 unit. So from this point forward, we're essentially on a nice fiscal calendar now. So starting January 1, 2018, we'll all start earning our 2018 unit together, and we will contribute our cash contribution, whatever that is, as set by the membership committee. We will do our what's proposed to be 50 hours of community service in 2018, and everybody will start kind of in a very organized way this January, and then the last of the chaos will wrap up here in December, and people will have earned their units. So right now, the official co-op members are these people, because they either were carryover units from the old LLC, Red Blue Voice, or they are people that have contributed in 2016 per the, what do we call that rubric? We call that like past participation rubric or something like that. That Ryan, Adam, and Buzzy and I created and then look back historically through people's contributions. And the primary factor in that was cash, honestly, like people that put cash in. Then the second thing was time. So if you put time and cash in 2015 or 2016, were probably offered a unit. So you'll recognize some names there. And then if your name's not on there, don't panic, because in December, your unit will be issued. And then in 2018, stuff like that. If you were given a unit offer and your name's not on here, if you were literally either physically or received electronically a document that said unit offer, and you gave it back to us and your name's not on here, you need to tell us because we messed up. So do that too, right? Yeah. Okay, and this will all be kind of like formal at the state level, right? Like, so this cap table isn't just for like our own amusement. Like, this cap table actually has documentation that goes to the state and everything too. It's a true legal document. So we can't play hard and fast with the rules. I don't know why I'm so distracted by the noises outside. So with signed unit agreements comes process and formal practice, and it's yes, question. Oh, I like this. This is fun. Is this in haiku form?
Pursuant to section 1.10, is the previous slide the voting list?
This is a question that Ron is going to address as soon as we have a moment of time where we vote. So Ron and I were just talking about like what makes sense practically, right? Because Matt Blake is in Chicago and really doesn't care probably too much about the day-to-day operations, right? So we're going to talk about that, but we're going to do it like 6 slides from now. So it's been a little bit of growing pains this month, right? Because rigor has slowly started to seep into our previously informal, non-rigorous system. And with rigor is going to come some discomfort, but we have to stay sort of collectively committed to this idea that we have to formalize process, we have to write stuff down, and we have to refer to that written documentation for all matters moving forward. And the reason why is because our goal, or maybe not our goal, but the assumption is that in the next 18 months, membership is going to increase in size significantly. New personalities are going to come into the co-op that none of us even necessarily have personal relationships with, right? And with those new personalities, we need process to manage our goals, right? We need process to make sure that we're all still moving in some sympathetic, rhetorical, and social and economic mission. So there are 3 documents that you are obligated to review. And if you haven't read them yet, we plead with you to read them because they govern very important legal and fiduciary and process sorts of things that we need to all be aware of how it works. First one's the operating agreement. It's pretty much a boilerplate document. So it's just your standard LLC operating agreement. There's a few notable tweaks in that operating agreement, including salary caps for executive officers, right? Because if this is wildly successful and making millions of dollars a year, I think that in its inception, we very highly prioritize the idea that people at the top shouldn't be making sick amounts of money at sort of on your backs, basically, or on our backs, I should say. And then the operating agreement largely points to the second document, which we're going to go over in detail, the standards and practice document. But generally, operating agreements spell out annual meetings, election of managers. That's the executive committee. There's some confusing there's some opportunities for confusion in that because the operating agreement calls people managers, and in our vernacular and some of our other documentation, we call those people executive committee. So be careful with that. And also just rules around transfer of units. So like if you die, does your next of kin get your unit? Like that kind of stuff. It's all spelled out in this very dense, legalese, for the most part, written document that's no fun to read. Please, Adam. Yes, please interrupt me at any time.
Having read the operating agreement, or
Thank you.
attempted to,
Thank you.
Is there an English version that is available?
No, but we could do office hours, right, around parsing that for sure. And Renee has offered to do office hours, and so that might be something Renee could help us with.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to. I asked that because I think it would be helpful moving forward to have entrance kit for any new members.
For sure.
And this would be part of it. And
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later.
And that has a lot to do with equity too, right? Like our operating agreement precludes a whole chunk of the population from participating in an informed way because it's written like a lawyer would write it. No offense, Renee. But we want to lower that barrier to entry. So one way we've mitigated that is we've created this second document that we call Standards of Practice, which you probably agree is much easier to read, right? Right. And Adam agrees, even though he didn't shake his head, yes. That Standards and Practice document is a more workable document that is essentially our bylaws. It's essentially our operating procedures. So there's all this sort of boilerplate process around the entity, the LLC entity, and then we take that down to another document so that we have more an operational control over things. And so if you're going to pick one to start with, right, if you're going to pick a document to start with, I would recommend you start with that Standards and Practice document. And unfortunately, I got to take it off the slide here, Mike. So, you know, both of these documents are in PDF form. I can give them to you as a drive link, but they're also here on the website. This Standards and Practice document probably merits some attention right now. So if there are no objections, I'm going to go through this quickly and hit big points. And I know that's tedious. Nobody wants read to, but I feel like it's super important. So our mission statement was previously agreed to by membership committee meeting months ago. It got tweaked a little bit by the lawyer. And then there are these operating principles sections, which are standard sort of cooperative principles that are best practice and, again, kind of boilerplate, right, Ron? Internationally recognized cooperative principles. And some of this language has been tweaked to fit who we are and what our mission is, but generally it's just high-level goals, objectives, not objections, objectives, and a spelling out of our mission, right? And here's where it gets really important, right? Like we have this idea that moving forward, a big organization that does digital services, that provides training for people, that provides access to capital and investment, that provides all these complicated things, we have to parse those complicated things down into working committees so that problems can be solved, right? And so that information can move effectively through all of the membership as it needs to move through the membership, and so that people that are in leadership positions can make informed decisions that are heavily influenced, if not directly directed by the membership that we are obligated to serve in a very legally binding way. So we have two kinds of committees, and the biggest thing that separates those committees is the cost of that committee to the books of the co-op. So if the committee's action costs more than $1,000, we call it an operational committee, and it has more stringent rules. If the committee's action costs less than $1,000, we call it an ad hoc committee, and it's more informal because $1,000 is less important than $10,000. So this is something that you got to kind of like internalize in your interaction with the co-op. The idea that you're going to either form a committee or participate at a committee level to make big decisions. And so please read this. Please read it carefully. And remember, this Standards and Practice Agreement is super easy to modify. So if upon 3 months of operation or 10 days of operation, you guys are like, hey, you and Ron did a horrible job in this section, we need to amend it, then we just amend it. But we can't amend it till everybody has kind of like made it their own and kind of owned it, right? And then decision making in general is done through this practice called consent rounds, which Ron has done some exercises around at previous general membership meetings. So we're going to do that again tonight around some issues, but it's basically a process by which we cycle through a decision in the most efficient way. It's sort of like an agile methodology, honestly. It's basically iterating on the ideas that are in a room to arrive at a decision that has the most support behind it. Then there are some things here about the executive committee, which currently, as you remember, is just me and Jason. But next year, we add a person to the executive committee. And then the year after that, we add a person to the executive committee. And then the year after that, we add somebody to the executive committee. So then there's a year of 5 people on the executive committee, and then Jason and I resign. And that's a very important thing to be planning for in the future. So by 2022, Jason and I don't necessarily want to be in charge unless we're obligated to somehow, right? So this kind of spells that out. We have broad authority. We're not going to lie to you. The executive committee essentially has complete fiduciary control over this co-op. And the primary reason for that is that Jason and I have real cash investment in the co-op, tens of thousands of dollars. And so until that's paid off, it's hard for us to give up financial control of this, because if it runs into the ground, then we lose tens of thousands of dollars. But we want to give up control, and we want to essentially have our tens of thousands of dollars paid back. And so that's sort of why we've done this kind of add an executive committee member every year over the next 3 or 4 years. And so there are 2 types of membership at WorkHard Pittsburgh. You're probably already kind of familiar with this concept just because you live it every day, right? There are people that are earning a unit for the year and becoming a vested member with voting rights and the ability to do stuff. And then there are people that are just coworkers, and they occupy some amount of our real estate. They do something in our physical facilities, but they're not voters. They don't have any authority. They are just tenants, for lack of a better word. And I'll put that in air quotes because it's not legally binding. They're not legally binding tenants that exist in the system. And so this little table kind of spells out the difference between the two. And then it goes into a discussion of what a unit is and what rights you have as a holder of the units. High-level important stuff is that the membership has to decide if there are ever sort of exit events. The membership has to decide what to do with any large chunks of money that we get in, right? So do we take any profits that we make and do we turn that into new investments for the next generation of companies and products moving through the ecosystem, or do we pay that out as dividends? And the more units you have, if we decide as a membership to pay things out as dividends, the more of a pro rata share of profits you will take. So it behooves people to earn lots of units and earn a unit every year, right? We're trying to compel people to be actively participating in this for the next 5 years and earn as many units as they can. So an example, as I've used many times, right? One day Academy Pittsburgh will get acquired, and that will be an exit for Academy Pittsburgh. The co-op owns 40% of the LLC Academy Pittsburgh, and that will generate some amount of cash that is a chunk of money that the membership either is going to carve up as dividends for unit holders or reinvest in people that are in system. One thing that is, yes, whoa.
Oh, I bet you a lot of people are curious about, does the number of shares you own determine the number of votes you have?
That's a good question. No, we are still a 1-vote co-op per person. So even if you just have 1 unit, you're still going to get a membership vote on issues that go to the membership for vote. But Ron and I are going to, Ron's going to discuss later other ways we make decisions that aren't even necessarily bound in the voting of the membership. Then this tells you how you earn more units. Talks about an annual fee, which will be set by the membership committee the year before the year starts. Talks about how that's broken down pro rata for the year. And it also talks about shutting off new members in October so that there's essentially no opportunity to join the co-op in the 4th quarter. This year we've made some exceptions to onboard people that we think are really valuable, but moving forward, we'll probably next year be less likely and less inclined to do that because honestly, right, if we're successful, these units are going to become really sought after. And we want to rigorously gatekeep who we let into the co-op as the need for co-op members reduces, right? As we fill up, we just don't want anybody rolling in here and taking a unit. We want to be really thoughtful and meticulous about the kinds of people we want. Okay. Liquidation units, not super important. Dividends, spells out just what I said. This tells you how to form a committee, the exact process by which you should act to form a committee, and you should read that carefully, right? Especially if it's especially if it's a new one that we don't have yet. So there's a bunch of committees that kind of already exist. We're not going to retroactively apply this process to that, but the next committee that forms, right, the next new thing that has to be addressed should adhere to these rules to the letter, please. Same thing with the ad hoc committees. And then what Ron just said, 1 member, 1 vote, and then how committees interact and make recommendations. We'll talk about that here in a second. So sorry, that was tedious. I apologize, especially if you were watching online because you couldn't see the document. I suppose you could have been following along. All of those documents are easily accessible in the footer of Work Hard Pittsburgh. There's an operating agreement, there's a standards and practice agreement, and then the third document is just called Member and Office Space Access, and that's basically like a terms of use, like, right? Like lock the door, use the calendar, don't burn the place down, like just high level day-to-day rules that we hold each other to. Don't leave a mess, right? Like don't make a mess of the place and expect somebody else to clean it up. And these are important because if we ever want to kick somebody out, like these are the rules that we will point to kick somebody out. And so familiarize yourself with those as well. Okay, this is going to start going faster too. So per the standards practice agreement, there's operational committee, there's ad hoc committees, right? As you start working in your committees, in the Slack channel for the committee, please pin who the chair of the committee is, right? Who's in charge of that committee in a pinned message in Slack so that people know who to reach out to with questions. And please also pin meeting dates. I would suggest that every committee has a monthly recurring meeting, but obviously that'll have to be decided at the committee level depending on the need, right? So obviously if you don't need to meet, don't meet. So here's where it gets important, and I need input, and we need to make an important decision about equity and inclusion. So right now, in the operating agreement, there will only ever be 300 units. So we've already given out approximately 25. At the end of 2017, we're going to give out another 25. So we've essentially burnt through 1/6 of all of the available units there will ever be. And we run a real risk of doing what every other sort of freelance or tech-based startup kind of does, and essentially creating a culture that's essentially white men. And I think from the get-go, we all signed on to this idea that this co-op was going to sort of adhere to some sort of, or act as some kind of progressive alternative in the city to try to push a larger social mission of giving people, no matter who they were, economic opportunity. So we need to build in, and this is a proposal, so I should say, as the executive committee chair, I guess, as the president of the LLC, I strongly recommend that we build into our operating agreement essentially a unit pool reserve that can only be allocated to women, minorities, refugees, veterans, the same kind of way that Academy Pittsburgh does for its training. I think the fairest thing to do would be to just follow sort of the demographics of Allegheny County. And we can discuss this in greater length at the membership committee level. And Ron, this is where you probably should step up and talk about how we might make this decision. But that's where we are. Like, we've got to write down that we're going to put aside some number of units that are not going to go to white men, and those units are locked. And I think we should also add to that we're not allowed to ever increase this number of shares until those units are allocated to people of color or people of economic disadvantage. So I guess, Ron, what I'd like you to do is talk about how we might make this decision efficiently. Stand in front of that camera.
There. Good. Okay. So, so to avoid a tyranny of the majority, a good way to do this is to find a solution that everybody can consent to. It doesn't have to be 100% go, yeah, this is it, but it is something that everybody can live with. So a process is often used for in cooperatives for the decision making. Should I back up? Okay. That the group who is leading the decision makes a proposal, but before they do that, you sort of back into what are the dimensions of the problem. So if there's a problem, here's our illustration. Oh, can you go back to that?
I was going to the illustration.
Oh, I have it. Oh, that's a good thing to do. Yeah. But I also need the. Okay, thanks. So we want to match. Do we want to match the regional demographics? Do we want to match the city demographics? Those are another one. So the reason why we would need to do this is this way. Is we want to know what makes up possible solutions. So if the question is, should there be an allocation for membership? What are the dimensions of that? What would the dimensions of that allocation be? How would we divide up the problem? So with this example, the dimensions would be, we have African Americans in the area. We want to include them. We have Hispanic, Asians in the community, refugees in the community. We want to be able to include them. 50% of the community is women. We want to include them. Those would be what, in this parlance, would be the dimensions of the problem or the matter at hand. So,
So where would we make that decision, Rob? Do we make that decision here in the room? Do we make that decision as a straw poll to all members in email? Do we send it to committee for a recommendation? Where does that decision get made?
we can decide, use the same process to decide whether the decision gets made right now or whether it is made by committee. So we have someone with a suggestion? Knowledge.
Peace. So I think that if we want to be like push the envelope, I think that we shouldn't match the city, and especially not the region. So I think we would want to challenge ourselves and be greater. Now, what that looks like, I'm not sure, but I just think that you know, Pittsburgh is the widest metropolitan area in the whole country. So I don't know if we're like, I mean, we're doing something because we're not just saying, hey, who gives a shit? But pardon my language, but. You know, if we want to push the envelope, I would challenge us to challenge ourselves to think, how can we be better than? So then we could just not say, hey, we're just as good as the city, which is kind of crappy. We could say we're way better than the city, or, you know, 10% or whatever those numbers may be.
Right.
So I'm just throwing it out.
So right now, this looks like it surpasses the city. The city is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's about 20% African American, maybe 25%. Yeah, okay. So we're right there. Yeah.
So it sounds like some committee has to investigate this carefully.
We just saw that it got complicated, and it wasn't a matter of do we open on Friday night for some show and things like that. So this would be, like you have it, a membership committee. So let's just go through the exercise so you get an idea. So what we've done was we've listed the dimensions of the problem. We have our allocation. Then we would make a round. So if anybody has anything to say, what would you say about this allocation that's proposed right here?
So knowledge says we should do better than.
We should be better, right. So that's one. Does anybody else have anything to say? You can say, I pass, or this is fine with me, I consent, as we go around. Because the important part about this process is that everybody's heard from, and you go around in a circle or a line, however it is, just to make sure that everybody speaks. And by doing that, you know you're going to be able to speak, so you don't have to sit there not listening, waiting for you to to be able to pop into the conversation. Colleen.
So I'll start. Do I have to see that?
Yes, go right.
So I might say that if we're going to do better, maybe what we should do is match the demographics of the nation, and that might be the percentages that we want to adhere to.
I see. How would they compare? We would like to know that. The people will find out. Yeah, we'll find out that information it exists. Does anybody else have anything? This is just for as an example.
Come on, Ryan. Help us out.
I think we should kick this up to the membership committee to gather more information. Sounds like a solid plan.
That's a proposal to close the discussion and have a consent round. So what we would do in that case was, after everybody comes around, we would say, okay, Ryan has suggested we close it and decide, and then confirm that with everybody.
Right, but if that's his turn, then he wouldn't say that at the end. He would just.
He's saying that now we're holding it to the end. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the? Speaking about dimensions, what are the total list of categories of people, demographics of people here? Because all I see is African American and women.
Right.
But we mentioned veteran.
Yeah,
What
that's a
about
good question.
LGBT.
So what we would do is, when somebody says, okay, these are the dimensions, there's African American, there's women, there's another, then we say, are the dimensions complete? And your question goes right to that. That's great, because they're not, and we want to be able to do that. So within a committee, they would be doing that. That's what they'd be working on. It'd just be a working meeting. For our purposes, we would may have to just refer it to the committee, but it might be something simpler that we could decide right away. Jason?
And along those same lines, I'm thinking this is something that needs to be done at committee, but when we're looking at so many different demographics, refugees, veterans, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, women, you know, something along the lines of maybe 2/3 of the total shares are reserved for someone in a minority characterization, and then maybe the membership committee talks. Because when I look at 25% African American, 50% women, that seems limiting to me. You know, so what? If we have 52% women, we're going to turn away women? But I think we should make sure that there's a large percentage reserved for those minority shares, and then let the membership committee kind of, and maybe those aren't hard and fast. If we say 25% African American, but there's 30% who are qualified and want to participate, then there should be a plus or minus dividend perhaps, so we can include as many qualified people as possible.
Good. So you can see how it can get complicated in a hurry, which is why the committees are going to be very important, and your participation in the committees is really important, because that's where small issues can stay small and not become really large issues.
And committees can solicit broadly the membership's opinion.
Yeah, right. So after these clarifications, like what Jason brought up, what Ryan brought up, what Adam brought up, we would say dimensions are complete. The dimensions are complete. We're able now to see how people feel about that. So then, after the presenting the problem, listing the dimensions, what we would do then was have a reaction from everybody around the circle and see what people think about it. And if they have objections, then we list them, and then the group addresses those objections. Somebody says, Jason brought up what could be an objection. We don't want to have such a hard and fast system to make sure that we have a allocation for every minority group, when we're not going to see many Bhutanese roll by and ask for membership, but we can do something else that's inclusive and meaningful. And so that would be addressed by the group to make sure that the solution aligns with the mission of the proposal and really practically can solve the problem. Yeah, I think the technique of the method of using the 3 rounds propose, bring up the problem, define the problem, list the dimensions of the problem, and then develop a proposal, ask for clarifications, and then react, and then if there are objections, address them, and then that loops back again into an amended proposal, and then we react to that, make sure that that's complete. I'm going to put this, Mike, can I put this in front of the camera? This is for everybody in video land. This is a really good depiction. Oh, I see where I am. Yeah. So that would be, this is one of the best techniques for doing that.
Let's just post it in Slack.
Yeah.
So is now the time for someone to suggest a proposal, or will we love doing all that regular?
So I think that Ryan said, let's push this to committee. So let's just vote on
Yeah.
it. Let's go to committee.
So we don't vote unless there is something that statutorily says we vote. So let's go around the room. Should the matter be taken to the membership committee?
Yes.
Yes.
Fuzzy.
Yes.
Oh, you're just hanging out.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And this is just an exercise. So, but it looks like David.
Yes.
Take it to the committee. Knowledge. Antonio, you're allowed to vote. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Okay, so it looks like the consensus, everyone consents to sending that issue to the committee, allocation of membership and the priorities for inclusion. So that's how it's done. We'll be doing this a lot so that it just becomes more smooth and second nature to people. It can be very often much more efficient than voting in that it generates fewer objections, you know, so whoever's in the 40%, if it's a 60-40 vote, may have, you know, there's always, there can be some things that build up that inhibit the culture going forward.
And what is the definition of a consensus versus a majority?
Well, a majority is, right, 50.00001, yeah, percent. A consensus is everybody agreeing to it.
Everyone?
Right. But a consent is what we just did. Everybody says, this is an action that I'm okay with.
So if one member dissents,
Do it in the mic, because these are good questions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
so if one member dissents and will not, 99% are in agreement and one dissents,
Mhm.
then it won't pass ever?
I wouldn't say it won't pass ever, but it needs another look. Right. And then what happens with some groups that work this way is then the process goes forward to what do we do with this matter now that somebody dissents, and how can the proposal be amended, not to cater to that person, but to address the objection they have.
Yeah, but isn't that essentially what you can be the holdout? I mean, this has been a problem that the founding of the United States had this issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Basically, the executive committee makes the decision, right? so this is like, we're not going to get lost in bohemian, hippie, esoteric, cooperative ideas, right?
So then do our votes matter?
Or ultra-fascist, right? So the point of this is that just like when you have traditional bylaws in a nonprofit, there are like Robert's rules of operation.
Yeah.
This is similar similar to that in process building, right? So the idea is that when we're good at this, it's not going to be so cumbersome. It's not going to be so cyclical. It's going to be intuitive that you're going to quickly survey the room to see where everybody is. If everybody's kind of on board, then you just move forward, right? Like it's a way to kind of expedite things moving forward and decision-making moving forward while being transparent about what people really want and what people really believe.
Josh and Jason have more authority now because they're vast majority owners. But as things get to be more equal in ownership, we could run into this. But the staked interest of people in the cooperative, money on the line, is often is an incentive to make it act.
You have to be careful because it spells this out on the operating agreement, right? So the executive committee is empowered to make decisions until that it changes in the operating agreement. So in 2022, if somebody else is running the executive committee, that still has the authority to make decisions nimbly. We can't groupthink. Like these kind of businesses that we deal in that require nimble, thoughtful, and membership input, they can't get stuck because one person won't consent.
I agree with that, but I feel that the system that's been set up makes the voting meaningless.
Right. I don't disagree, right? So pay us back, right? Kick us off the executive committee and then redo the bylaws.
So here's, but so what I hear Adam saying though is if we go around the room and we all think we're all consenting and then we have one person that's not consenting, couldn't we, like, why do we have to adopt that structure exactly? Like, why couldn't we agree here tonight that we want to say like 75%, 85%, like why do we have to accept that if one person is a holdout, then we're done, and then Josh and Jason get to decide?
You're way off the rails. Everybody's way off the rails, right?
Okay.
So let me just get it back on the rails.
Again.
So there are committees. These decisions should be made through consent rounds in committees. So if there is an issue like the one that we've proposed, right, that needs to be made in a small group setting informed by the membership. And so the decision that the committee makes then goes for final approval to the executive committee. And there wouldn't be a practical reason for us to reject it unless it was something that we thought was financially irresponsible, right? So if the membership committee comes back and says, we're going to do 28% minority and 30% women, and this has all been done through some sort of transparent process that we've documented, that we've used these consent rounds to come to decisions by getting input from the membership at large, those are kind of decisions that are going to move forward. So let's not get hung up on the if, what, then, might, could happens. Let's just throw important decisions into the committees. Let's efficiently figure out what the consensus most favorably perceived action would be, make that as a recommendation, and move that decision forward.
Okay, but I don't see this issue as an if, maybe, oh, it might happen. I see it as clear and present in some situations that are going to be upcoming.
Sure.
And
Give me an example.
well, you voiced a concern about purchasing internet access, and this hasn't been fully fleshed out, right? We haven't had a really good conversation about if it's worth it, what we're going to do with it, fine. But everyone I talk to is like, hey, that sounds like a good idea. And the executive committee is completely against it. So what happens when the situation arises,
No,
not if and when, but
So the executive
presently?
committee is not against it. The executive committee does not feel like it has any information laid out in an organized fashion.
But what I'm saying is it's already happening that there is a situation arising where the membership votes don't matter. So this institution is cooperatively
But there's not been a membership
cooperatively
vote on
run.
that, though, Adam.
I'm just saying, what's the repercussions? What's going to happen when that happens? When the executive committee is 100% on one side and the membership is pretty much 100% on the other side.
The executive committee wins,
Okay.
per the operating agreement.
This too is common in cooperative conversions where there are private owners gradually exceeding being bought out to broader membership, and this is how it's set up. It had to be that way because to protect the original owners and also to protect the
Well, and I would add it has to be that way because we have to be lean, right? There's going to be 100 people in this co-op, and right now there's a pretty tightly knit culture of people here that kind of think, behave, and live a similar lifestyle. But over time, that might change dramatically, right? Like, we might end up being more neighborhood centric. And so the wants, desires, and goals of those people might be in direct conflict with this original cohort of people. Ron, I'm going to move on if you don't mind. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, please.
What about decisions that are happening without any of the committees knowing the information that are continually happen, like that, where the committees might feel that they could weigh in on big decisions that those decisions aren't even brought in front of anybody?
Right, so that we have to get better at that. And so committees have to meet regularly. Committees have to report back at this meeting what they met about and tell us what information is missing. Because what we haven't been able to solve, right, is that there are 25 projects going on in the Work Hard Pittsburgh ecosystem right now, and we can't practically tell everybody everything about all those projects, just as a matter of time and space, right? So the real estate committee has to gather all of the information about the real estate transactions, right, and bring it to the next meeting in November and summarize it, right? And the finance committee and the production committee and whatever other big pressing issues there are in the culture, that needs to be delivered broadly in this general meeting by the committee head. So if there's an issue that's not being widely discussed that's really important to someone, that someone should make a committee around it and seek to document all of the information and then present it back to the membership. Because there's just, again, it's a problem of scale, right? Like, I'm trying to solve the problem of scale in 2019. There's just no way we're going to know or be compelled to tell you this meeting will be 7 hours long every month. And so we have to figure out more efficient paths to get that information out. And so now that we're formal, and now that there are people on the cap table, right, like, that needs to happen at the committee level through engagement. Okay, so there's other things on here that are membership related, and if there's no objection, I will defer all of those recommendations and decisions to the membership committee, including what to do with people that don't pay their bills, because we have that as a kind of perpetual problem in system for like the last 2 years. Okay, I'm going to keep going because we're running late already. Real estate update. 744 is final and closed, so we have a deed, and we own that building now and are collecting that upstairs rent from the tenants upstairs, so that's good. 829 has a working budget and a draft outline of what the space might physically look like, and so we've given that to RA360 to kind of see what this expanded plan might look like, and I'll briefly defer to this spreadsheet. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I was going to spend more time here, but I'm not. I'll put it into the real estate committee, and then they can synthesize it. But basically, what this shows is all of Work Hard Pittsburgh's revenue projected over 1, 3, and 5 years, including revenue we generate from rent, revenue we generate from digital services, from Academy Pittsburgh, from your membership dues, and then the most important one is revenue we generate through the renting of the new proposed space in 829 Industry. And this number changes radically depending on what % ownership we have in that new entity. So with the ownership multiplier set at 50%, so if the new entity forms and RA360 owns half and the co-op owns half, that changes dramatically the amount of revenue we get back at the end of the year from renting out 829 Industry. And then the same thing on this side, and I'll share this with anybody who would like to play with it. This is, again, tentative, proposed, draft. Nothing here is written in stone. These are the expenses that kind of go along with the acquisition of that building. So I have it currently configured. By year 3, we're essentially close to breaking even. And so we have to then be able to raise enough cash to get us to year 3 through some sort of LISC or URA or Bridgeway Capital loan or debt instrument. So that's kind of a quick and dirty update from the real estate committee. Hello. Where'd it go? Sorry. Justice. Your turn. You tell me when you want me to flip slides. Or do you want to
All right. Thank you ahead of time for your time. I do apologize for some slight grammatical errors on this. I realize I sent my draft, but anyway. So as some of you already know, we've discussed getting FiOS internet service installed at 744 East Warrington. This brief presentation is just going to go through some of the, cost analysis and what will be involved with getting this new service. So to start out, I'm going to talk about some of the technical limitations of the two services. So copper is an older technology, which Comcast currently uses, and fiber optics is a new technology that Verizon just implemented in Pittsburgh about 8-10 years ago. So there's some huge differences to both technologies. I'll get to that in detail in a second. The other thing that you'll find is that Comcast's advertising is really blatantly misleading. If Josh calls to cancel service, they're going to say, but wait, we'll give you 300 megabit. We'll match Verizon. That's not true. What we need is upload speed, because on the internet there's two speeds. There's download and upload. Upload's important for people like Buzzy or anyone involved with media, who needs to do large file uploads to the cloud, basically anything that involves the internet in modern 2017. Comcast's old copper infrastructure has a maximum of 20 megabit upload. So even if their sales department says, we'll give you 300 down, that doesn't mean anything for upload. You're capped at 20 no matter what, because that's the physical limitation. Verizon's speed has a maximum of 1,000 megabit. Quite the difference. Verizon's fiber is also not susceptible to the plethora of dropout and interference issues of the copper Comcast service. And I'm sure, all of us have been in the office at one point or another, and we're like, the internet's down again. Great, let's go reboot the modem. No more of that. I can vouch personally. I've had FiOS, and at my house, it's been online for more than 1,200 days without a single interruption. So no more having to deal with, lost time or productivity because the internet's down. And quite honestly, when we see the cost analysis in the next slide here, work hard is being ripped off, and that's not cool. So what is exactly the new cost of the service? So the new Verizon FiOS service is $219.99 per month. That's for 300 megabits per second service. All right, that's down and up. That includes static IPs and no contract for the first year. After the first year, the promotional pricing ends and the price rises to $229.99 per month, which still is $20 cheaper than what we're currently paying, which is $250 plus. I don't have the exact number, but I know it's more than $250 per month for a mere 60 down and 10 up, which realistically we only get about 50 down and 4 to 5 up. So we're not even really getting the service we're paying for.
Jason, how much is the Comcast bill every month?
Two different bills. One's 160, one's 140.
But that's because one's here and one's there.
Yeah.
So you're wrong, Justice. We're only paying $150 for work hours.
That's not what I was told.
Spoken to Verizon within the last year. They said Verizon told me they couldn't compete with the speed in this area that Comcast is providing.
Okay. I can rectify this. How much did you say per month you're spending for?
Let's say, for lack of a better term, 160 per month for each building.
Okay. I can say for a fact that was 300 megabit service from Verizon. We can downgrade to 150 megabit service for about 120 a month. Now, what we're always leaving out of this conversation is the upload speed. I mean, with Comcast, you may be getting 200, 300 down, but the upload speed is where our current bottleneck is. So
I talked to Verizon because I wanted to go to Verizon. It's been within the last year, so if something has changed, I'm willing to talk to Verizon again.
okay.
But
Oh,
within the last year, Verizon said we can't compete with what Comcast is offering.
that's a good point. Something we need to look into for that is if you inquired whenever they thought that we only had copper service available at WorkHard. So I just recently talked to one of Verizon's engineers, And our building wasn't cited for fiber service. They still had DSL service, which, yes, is much slower than what Comcast currently offers. So if you're okay with that, maybe we could go in depth more later just to see. Okay, thank you. And yeah, just to continue real quick, one of the problems that we were all concerned about was getting into a contract again. You know, we don't want to be locked into a contract for, 2-3 years. Verizon does offer no contract plans for $10 more per month, and this means absolutely no fees whatsoever if we do choose to cancel. There's a quote from Nathan of the Verizon Small Business Sales Team saying, yes, if you choose the no-term agreement, you'll be free to reconsider your decision, and even you can cancel a service at any point in time. There won't be any cancellation fees. So to put that to rest, yes, there is a no contract option, and I've already included it in the price. It's just $9.99 more per month on whatever else the bill was. And then this adds to the value of 744 East Warrington as well, especially now that we own the building. At the moment, Verizon Fios service isn't even available at all. So if we rent that out to a tenant or even, the units above us, if they ask, is Fios internet available here, we have to say no. Just allowing Verizon to come in and install cables, which is no cost to us, would, I think, add value to the building itself, because then the option is there for anyone who wants it, regardless if we purchase the services or not. And then the last point that was brought up was that, why even waste time with this if we're going to be moving to RE360's offices anyway, or, that was proposed. Well, that's where porting of service comes into play. We call up Verizon. They'll move our account, move over our IPs, move everything to the new location, no problem, no fees. RE360 already has Fios in their building, so it would just be a matter of calling them to turn it on. And again, direct message from Nathan here stating that, there would be no cost to move services. So, I mean, feel free to talk in detail.
Well, I mean, so the fundamental issue is that we're paying $150 a month over there. So whatever you guys do with the Verizon service has to cost $150 a month. So if you can get more upload and download for $150 a month, Jason's not going to object to switching services. But the issue that we had previously running up to this is that all of this information was not presented in a coherent fashion, right? It was presented over a week in Slack and from 3 different people telling sort of 3 different stories. And even today, like, we still have wrong information up there, right? Like, our bill is it is, because our bill is $249 for 2 locations, not for 1 location.
But we have that information now.
Right.
Yeah,
So
I apologize.
No, and I'm not trying to be hypercritical about this stuff, but like, we've got to get process, right? Like, we've got to do this at a committee level and coherently, like you did just now. This was great. We really appreciate this, so that we can make an informed decision. And so that's just it. So figure out what the upload up and down is. That's going to be, what is it, $160 a month or whatever it is? Yeah. Tell Jason, and he'll switch the service.
Okay, thank you.
Also, there's a huge thing we're missing. If we own the apartments upstairs, they can take the option to use our service and pay more in rent. And I know we're worried about illegal downloads and stuff, but we're currently doing that with MetaMesh all over the city right now. So
I feel like that is a service MetaMesh should provide. Like, I don't think
it'd be an easy $100 offset to the bill a month.
Yeah,
I
don't know. We have to think about that. I just think there's more to think about there. I think it's blurring 2 issues, right? Like, it's like nobody else typically does that in a residential lease. In a residential lease.
Okay.
So I don't know why we would, right?
The landlord gave us internet for free.
Did he? Yeah. Included in your utilities?
So
It was included in rent, not utilities. But
Comcast here at Academy is $105 a month.
And what's work hard?
And work hard's $160 a month.
Okay. So figure out what the equivalent.
$40 cheaper for 15 times the upload speed.
Yeah. So just figure out what the equivalent pack is from Verizon, and then tell Jason to switch it. Cool. So real quick finance committee update. Conservatively, we consumed about 20 grand of cash in the Hilltopolis event. So the hope, and while there's no guarantee, is that we'll recoup that in marketing and gig flow moving forward, but also just in sort of our fundraising for next year's Hilltopolis event. So Jason's working on some debt restructuring just to free up more cash so that we can pay all of the vendors that I know we have outstanding invoices with. I submitted I put in a $125,000 proposal to Partners for Work for Academy Pittsburgh. About 2 weeks ago, we put in a $500,000 grant to Google Workforce, which would create an apprenticeship program for Academy Pittsburgh grads and also hire on 2 full-time staff members that would help project manage. We are about to put in for a $75,000 catalytic grant. So that's the other upside to kind of Hilltopless is that demonstrating that we're really committed to sort of community involvement helps us with all this grant stuff. And there's probably about 40 grand of open or outstanding invoices coming into the next quarter. So while this 20 grand of cash is a bit of a dent in our operating budget, generally we should be able to recoup it all in the next 3 to 6 months without any super hiccups or worries. So the last thing I just want to talk about. Oh, yeah.
So with the finance committee, is there any plans for future meetings to see, I don't know, some kind of a budget related to, I know you guys have so many entities, like what are we going to start seeing from that so that we can make decisions?
Yeah. So last month we gave you guys balance sheets and profit and loss statements. And so we intend to keep doing that quarterly. Anybody who wants to join the finance committee should jump in the Slack channel. Well, we can do it monthly too, but well, I think if you're curious, you should join the finance committee. And then Jason and I meet typically Sunday mornings, once or twice a month. And generally, they're a bit of a slog.
That was the other thing, too, is if there's a point, I know it's not in the slides, but to announce what the committees are and invite people and dates.
We can certainly do that right now, yeah. But yeah, so if you want to be involved in the finance, you got to come when me and Jason meet on Sundays and go through the slog. Most of what Jason and I end up doing is rectifying Amazon purchases and credit card statements and basically putting those transactions into buckets in our QuickBooks. But honestly, like, more people should see that happen because it'll breed trust and transparency for sure. Cleanup day, I feel like we need a cleanup day. I feel like everything's kind of like scattered everywhere. So is there like strong... Yeah.
It is some, but it's not. That's 50% of the mess. I'm doing 98%.
Yeah. So part of that, I think, gets resolved in the production committee meeting, right? Because we need to think about the part of that mess. Just is because people yank gear out and they just leave it sit out. Yeah. Yeah. And so we need to solve that problem. And we've tried in the past to solve it, but I think it requires more drastic steps than what we've been taking. Yeah, yeah, I think so. So I think Ryan's got that already scheduled, the production committee meeting. But generally, like twice a year, we've been doing like big community cleanups. So like, how can we just pick a Saturday and just put it on the calendar now? Is there like, if there's no strong objections, I'll just pick it for like,
About Saturdays, everyone hates Saturdays. At least that.
Okay, well that's next bullet.
Okay.
Okay, but a cleanup's going to be like an all-day thing, so that kind of has to be, I think, right? Or do we want it differently? Does anybody have any strong opinions about community cleanup before I start yelling dates out?
Even Saturday's okay if it's in the morning.
Like just spring cleaning, just like the office, fall cleaning.
Yeah, just like spring cleaning. Like typically when we've done it in the past, we've made a big list on the whiteboards. And then people just come in, and I'll do the conference room. I'll do the kitchenette area. Yeah, no. How about like the 11th? Hitchhiker Brunch Fest. Looks like something's going on with Buzzy.
Yeah, but that's.
How about the 8th? How about the 8th? How about the 8th? Does anybody strongly object to Community Cleanup Day on the 18th of November? Is that a holiday? I always schedule things on holidays. It's the weekend before Thanksgiving, right?
I'm going to be in Ohio.
Oh, you lucky bastard. Okay, so I'm going to put it on, and then I'm going to put it in Slack tomorrow. And
10 a.m.?
well, I mean, we'll just make it all day so people can pop in as they want, right? And then the other thing I did this week was I deleted probably 60 people off of the shared calendar. So the deletions that happen occasionally, hopefully will get fixed a little bit because I've gotten rid of like people that aren't around anymore.
Did everyone stop to leave the calendar?
Just a bunch of work. Yeah, some stuff did. I lost some stuff.
All the other stuff, but we still have, we never not had access, all left somehow.
So I'll schedule this from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then pop in as you can. Okay. And then to Buzzy's point, and the last thing I wanted to talk about today. So everybody hates Saturday group meetings. So raise your hand if you hate Saturday group meetings. So about a third of you, right? Fourth of you. And so you would prefer, raise your hand if you would prefer these be on a weekday evening. So like half. So what do I do about that? Yeah. Raise your hand if you would prefer Saturday morning over Saturday evening. All right, so Saturday coffee mornings is what I'm hearing. Okay, and then should we try then Saturday morning for the next one? Any objections to trying Saturday morning for the next one? Church Sunday morning? Want to abandon church? Okay. All right. Okay, I appreciate your input. I know that this is a difficult thing that we're doing, and just would encourage everyone to stay positive and be faithful that we are trying to do what we think is the best thing for us long term, and that as we add people to this co-op, it's going to get crazy messy if we're not a core group of agreeable humans that are all kind of working towards the same goals. So if you're frustrated about things, make a committee, have an organized plan to deal with that frustration, and I promise you, if it doesn't cost us money, we'll do it. And even if it costs us money, we'll try to do it. But money is always going to kind of drive where we are right now, because we're always, it's tough we're always scraping by, right? And a lot of that's because we pushed really hard on what we perhaps should be doing. Like Hilltopless was a huge stretch for us, and it might even be considered an overreach. We'll have to see how it all plays out over the next 6 months to see if it was worth the input, right? Because we won't know for months and months and months whether that was worth doing or not. So there's definitely things that we can scale back as well, and we'd like to hear about those things from committee leaders. And so committees that currently exist are a finance committee, an events committee, a membership issues committee, which I kind of take as those rules that are in the footer, right? Like the rules that are linked in the footer of the Work Hard webpage. There's a pure membership committee, which should be talking about the diversity quotient, which should be talking about what inactive member rights are lost. A production committee, which Ryan heads. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we will have production committee meets on October 10th at 2 p.m. If you are not in that channel, Slack me a direct message. I'll add you. If you're not on Slack, you should probably talk to Josh.
And the production committee does what, Ryan? Because that's kind of vague.
We're so productive. We do. So primarily, I think this would lean towards digital media services. So if people are interested in like production facilities we have here at Work Hard, such as equipment, the green screen room, the ability to record podcasts, or even this live stream that we're running right now, that's all I would say production related. Certainly we can expand those ideas if people have other things they want to bring to that, but that's kind of the primary focus right now. So.
Real estate committee is my fault for not having meetings, but Anthony actually took it on himself to schedule the next real estate committee meeting, and that is Tuesday, October 10th at 6 p.m. So you could have a 2-for-1 deal if you wanted to participate in 2 committees in one day. Sales and services committee, or just what they sound like, sales is things that we can be doing to increase more jobs that come through here. Services is primarily around building better infrastructure around project management. So those already exist, and then those are all of the committees to date. Make more. Yeah, please.
So I'm not sure
but I guess I was sort of de facto the salesperson.
Yeah.
We were doing it on Fridays, but we're gonna have to change the date. So I would encourage that to, I don't know, encourage many people to add input on that channel of when would be best, and maybe also more than just me and Josh. And Holland, who was there, and I think Ryan was there once. So that's my input. We need to change the date, and I need more people.
And realistically, like, we should probably try to stack as many of these as we can on a day too.
I'll just suggest that any of the committees, I'll work with them on the decision-making process, the way we can do that. So just let me know.
Okay. Anything else? Questions? Dirty looks?
How do you get on a committee?
You go into the Slack channel and say I'm on the committee and show up to the next meeting. And if it's a new committee, you follow the standards and practice rules to forming a new committee.
Punishments for people that only use committees when they want and feel the need to.
Say that again?
Like, it should be like a.
Fuzzy, go to the mic, man.
Motherfucking mics.
First, I'm gonna form the committee to bring a room mic, so we don't have to come up here anymore. And then after, I forget what I was gonna say.
You were talking about like pop it in and out?
Oh, like yeah, if you're in a committee and you only like go to it to for your like only are there for the issues that like affect you. Like are we gonna try to avoid people joining committees for 2 weeks and then never going to a committee meeting for the real estate, like, or things like that, or someone wants like some of the members out, they only show up to voice their opinion on getting members out, and then they don't voice their opinion about anything else.
Some of that's in the standard, some of that's in the rules, but not. I don't. If I remember correctly, not rigorously spelled out. So, Ron, do you have an opinion on how committees can not just be full of complainers? This is the exercise committee.
Sales, anybody, yeah. You'll do a nomination. And so it's just not like, yeah, I'll do it, because everybody has reasons for doing what they do, and sometimes they're good for everybody, and sometimes they're just good for them. So nominations would include, I want to do this because I have this existed that would apply to the mission of the committee, and then people would vote on the nominations. And it's not necessarily saying, well, calling people out on stuff. Is just finding the best person for a task or membership in the committee, and it could be just that process.
So
drives home some more commitment to them.
Sounds like in the
going to be something that would have to be we just have to follow.
Yeah, it sounds like in the bylaws, because we have this in the Downtown CDC bylaws. If you miss 2 Community Development Corporation meetings, you're out of this Downtown CDC. So if you missed some number of committee meetings over some period of time, you're just gone. I think that's fair, right?
Yeah, I think it should be approved vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a general question. We're not tracking hours until 2018 for anything in particular, right?
No, we're just gonna.
So this year is just for the good of our hearts and stuff.
I mean, everybody here is realistically that's getting a 2017 share. Put their time in.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that time thing, right? If you recall, and this is good news actually. I don't know if I want to say that on live mic. Think about that. Remember, try to think back deeply about why we put that 50-hour service requirement in there, right? It was to clear the cap table of people that were no longer participating. And so it's a way to kind of like make sure that it's an active member, not just somebody who's an investor, right? Like, we just don't want an investor paying $540 and getting a unit. Like, they should have to have some sort of irritating time in the game like everybody else.
Part of that thought was if you show up to a committee, you get time towards that, right?
Get him, Rufus. No. Yeah. So 2018 though, and this is something the membership committee has to decide, is like, what's that time commitment? What's the cash commitment? What do we do with people that don't have the cash that still are really valuable to the community? There's lots of things that need to decide in the membership committee. And so we're going to shut the live stream off and throw out some dates, I guess, because I don't think it's worth live streaming us arguing about dates. Thank you again. I appreciate it. I know it's tense sometimes, but just hang in there. It's going to get better. Shut that live stream off, Mike. See you, people.